Yeah, so we did this last year, and the idea was just students had asked us about our opinions on WWDC announcements, and Josh and I typically pay a bit of attention as much as we can, given how busy we are during semester. And we pay attention to it because we teach a couple of iOS related units. There's this one that you three took, and there's also a postgraduate unit that teaches some iOS stuff. So we keep them up to date with the latest technologies and make decisions about when we should make updates to it. So this is kind of the beginnings of our discussions of what sort of seems interesting to us, what we're excited about. Yeah, very happy for the three of you to join in the conversation, or if there's anything particular you want to ask our opinions of, yeah, that'd be great. So yeah, how should we start this off, Josh? I have a few notes that I kind of jotted down for myself about announcements. Do you have any feelings or anything you particularly want to talk about, or that you're
just go through
about?
it. So I'm just trying to pull up my notes about it as well. I guess one of the things that I'm interested in is just seeing all of this new concurrency setup that they've got. And that's something that I'm going to be looking at over the break is, does it actually make things easier to understand and also deal with? If it makes it easier to understand and deal with, then I'm on board.
Sure. So I think there's kind of, I don't think this WWDC was really heavy on developer features. If you look at the keynote, I felt like a lot of it was about improvements to iOS and Mac OS and things like that. There were a few different things we can cover in terms of the developer tools. One is the kind of continuous integration stuff. One is the move towards being able to write apps on iPad, which is just a step. And then there's sort of the concurrency and share play, I feel like, as being the biggest things. So yeah, look, let's talk about the concurrency stuff a little bit first of all. I haven't played with it. Have you played with it?
I have not played with it. I have been avoiding downloading the beta of Xcode because I've had issues with those in the past. I'm waiting for its full release, which I'm guessing is probably in the next month or so.
Yeah, we'll get for the students here, we are up to the 5th beta of Xcode and iOS 15, which happens, right from the first day of WWDC. They make the first one available, and we usually get a golden master, which, or they call it release candidate now, which is their official release version, but made available about a week before the release of iOS 15. And at that point, you can use that version of Xcode to submit apps to the App Store. So most developers who are updating their apps for iOS 15 are doing the work now of testing their apps on the betas and getting it ready so that when the release date for iOS 15 is announced, they'll have probably a week to submit versions of their apps that make changes for compatibility and things like that. So I have run my apps on the beta with iOS 15 and tried them, and they seem to work, and there's no big issues. The only thing I've noticed visually is some of the section headings in table views are styled differently. So that's something I probably have to look at, but haven't figured out why that is. But yeah, this is sort of something that a lot of developers will deal with towards the release of iOS, which is typically in September, I would say, early
Within
September.
The first week or two, generally.
Yeah, so we're probably about a month out from that. Yeah, okay, so the concurrency stuff, I haven't tried it either, though I have watched some of the sessions and looked at it.
As well.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Most of the concurrency stuff that we dealt with in the unit was fairly simple. We don't get into really complicated scenarios, but one of the problem cases is where you have multiple things you have to download, and you want to do that asynchronously, and they depend on each other. So, for example, I think I had this in one case in the movie, a movie or a TV example I showed in the unit. You have to do one API call via URL session to get a base download path that's used for like episode or poster images or something. Can't remember which one it was. And then it's only once you've got that you can then, fetch a list of movies or episodes and display the posters, because you need that base URL. So that's a very simple example of something where there's this dependency where, or in this case, it's not even really a dependency. It's just you need both of those things to happen. So you could actually do them concurrently and just wait for the results of both, or you do them one after another. And the way we typically do this in the unit now, and the sort of past advice, is with completion handlers. So we all used URL session and we use completion handlers, and that's a block of code that we can run when that task is finished. And people use an approach called chaining, where inside one completion handler, when you've got the result of one thing, you set the second task going and have a second completion handler that's nested. And the problem with that is really that you get this chaining of completion handlers, and it can be hard to understand that logic. I mean, I think it's an interesting question you ask, Josh, which is how much more understandable is Swift's new approach? So what they announced was concurrency features for Swift built in as part of the language itself. And what this basically means is a concept of async and await, which is a pattern used in other languages, where you can mark certain parts of the code as being asynchronous or not, and then you can have things that wait on that task. So in the example I just gave of needing these 2 bits of information, how you might structure it is you might structure it as 2 different methods or function calls that go and cause web requests, and each of them would be async, so it could happen independently. And you would await, you could have them as async let variables in the new version of Swift. And then you can await the results of both of those variables, which will happen as a background task. But it means that you can structure the code in such a way that it looks linear, as in you see something that says let async or async let, can't remember which way it's written, and a method call for the first bit of information and something for the second. And then the part of the code that needs both of those things just comes after it with an await on both of those things. Now, it looks really simple and it's beautiful when they show slides, right? They show these long chains of completion handlers being collapsed into a little bit of code. But the question is then what your mental model of what happens in this case is, and understanding the behavior of the code, because it still means that some parts of that code run asynchronously, some bits happen in the background, the order of them is undefined, and you're just waiting on something. So, if you ask my opinion, is it positive? I think so. Have I taught it to students yet with that form? No. So, ask me again this time next year when we've taught the unit again, and have some experience with students and their questions about it. So I'm excited about it. I think it is a good change, but also personally, I've worked with a lot of concurrent code and worked with a lot of like GUI apps, both desktop apps and mobile apps. But I haven't worked with, or I've only worked a little bit with this particular pattern before. So it's not something I'm super familiar with. What are your thoughts on it, Josh?
No, I tend to agree. I'm interested to, so again, one of my plans over the break is to actually sit down and just write a couple of the labs that use async in using the new paradigm. So instead of using the completion handles like we used to do with the web requests, actually do it with async let variables, and actually see, one, how easy is it to use, but then also, again, the other thing, as Michael said, how feasible that is one thing, but then how easy is it for new programmers to Swift to then grasp is another. Because, well, I'm sure Michael could talk a lot about this as well. The web requests and asynchronous tasks with that and Firebase have always been pain points for the units in terms of students understanding, because it is a tricky topic to get. Like, it's not, everyone has, up to this point, aside from if you've done mobile apps before, has been taught a very linear way of programming. And it might be OO or it might be functional programming, but in both cases, you've still been taught the way that it's just, no, it's structured through the function. It goes like from top to bottom. Then you don't have to worry about all these things just spinning off and doing other things in the background.
Yeah, very, very procedural. And look, I don't know, have our students in the audience here, have you worked and done functional programming at all? Throw up your hand if you have.
I think 1045 does some of it, but I don't know how much they cover it.
There's also there's a unit called Programming Paradigms that does functional programming, I think in Haskell or something else.
Okay, so that's a yes. Someone has
2102 flashbacks. Now I don't know. Is this when you have a time
that's
machine and
paradigms.
You're talking about the future?
No,
so we're not talking
paradigms.
we're not talking about the year 2102. So yeah, I mean, there's a certain elegance to it, because one of the issues with programming full stop is code that has side effects, right? Which is if you write really nice code with good cohesion and low coupling, and you keep related things together and you try not to mess with anything outside the little piece that your method or your class is working with, then that's nice. But in most languages, you have the ability to access global variables and change state of other things. And often functional programming languages give you guarantees about some of that. And I think one of the benefits to this concurrency model in Swift is that the compiler understands it, and it's built into the language, and the compiler is going to be able to check things about it. So you'll be able to understand that parts of the code are asynchronous, parts of the code are not, and the compiler should be able to give you some warnings about this. So, I mean, while we're going to have to understand and make use of these keywords like async and await, it should be useful in terms of segregating the parts of the code that are designed to be for concurrency and the parts that are not. And I think some of the things they mentioned, which I don't have a great understanding of, but hi Ma, by the way, was like an attribute that you can put on code that says main actor. And this might be for, I haven't actually checked, but I assume this is for methods like, the table view reload data one that we make use of, that we would always have to call on the main thread. So if it has this attribute, it's something the compiler can say, hey, this thing always, if it's run in asynchronous code, you do nothing. It automatically will get run on the main thread. So that dispatch async main will just happen. And likewise, the other thing that the concurrency has is this concept of actors, where actors are sort of a piece of code, a class, if you like, that understands that it will be used in a concurrent environment or a concurrency environment. And as a result, the way that you have to deal with that is that you use things like mutexes or other mechanisms to make sure that if you're accessing a variable or a property of that class, that it doesn't happen on two threads at once, because this is how you get weird crashes, right? Where you've got one part of the code that's modifying an array while another part is accessing something, and weird things happen. So the idea behind actors is objects that understand they'll be used in this concurrent environment and automatically do those kind of checks for you. So again, it's about segregating the parts of the language that are concurrent versus not. Yeah, so I think that was all interesting. The other thing that I'll mention that I saw a couple of things worth mentioning, sorry, is all of their current APIs that make use of completion handlers, I think they've done some kind of magic to make it so the compiler understands that they all work in this new concurrent form. So that's nice. So at least everything in Apple's frameworks will make use of that, and we can sort of leverage it straight away. It'll be interesting to know whether that automatically happens for the use of completion handlers. For example, for libraries like Firebase, as Josh was saying, where they make heavy use of concurrency, and we need to make sure that we can just use that code, and they're not going to need to be updated for it. Before we start talking about any other topics, was there anything that any of you wanted to ask about the concurrency stuff that was announced? Hi, Kenneth. For the couple of you that have just joined, we're recording this for other students that can't attend. So if you're quite welcome to turn cameras on and speak as part of the call, but if you want to kind of remain anonymous and unseen, just leave your camera off and stay quiet. Did you have any other thoughts on concurrency, Josh, or that was where you were with that?
That's where I am with that. And as you mentioned, Firebase, I think, is going to be the big one, because sometimes they can take their sweet time bringing features to Swift, as we've seen in the past. How long did it take for them to actually start bringing the proper codable mapping across? And even then, it's still not perfect.
Yeah, I don't know. It was only this year that we could properly use it, because object IDs on Firebase objects, which are fairly important, because if you want to delete something, you need to know its ID. We could use Codable last year, but there were hacks to deal with the document ID. So that really wasn't properly supported until this year.
And now you've just got the annotation for it, which is fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I understand that, because their Swift part of their library, or the extension, the Swift extension, is kind of in beta, or they class it as experimental or something like that. But
yeah,
if you're really being a good citizen in terms of Swift and iOS, then you want to be using things like Codable. This is the right way to be doing things.
Yeah, but also good citizen for Swift and Google is an interesting one.
Yeah. Before we go on and discuss any other topic, I'm interested from the students that are here. First of all, did you see the announcements for WWDC? And then if you did, what were you most excited about from it? Doesn't have to be a developer technology, could just be something that's a feature of iOS or something else they announced. I'd be interested to know if, what your thoughts on that were. And while you do that, I'll ask Josh, beyond the developer technologies, was there anything you're excited about in the announcements?
Probably the biggest one that I was excited about is the fact that they're finally starting to bring more ability to code to iPad. So this has been a hobby horse of mine for a long time. That's why Michael's laughing.
I think I asked Josh what his wish list for for WWDC was, and he said, I want Xcode on the iPad. And for those we've all used Xcode on a Mac. It seems like a big ask to bring Xcode to an iPad.
Except for the fact that they're now running on the same processors, so they have no bloody excuse.
Yeah. Okay, so Amesh said car keys and find my network. I was also excited about the car key stuff. So what they announced was, I guess I'm excited about the greater key functionality as part of Wallet. So they have been working in this direction for a little while now. They've got this near field communication hardware as part of the iPhone, which is like just available for developers on Android, and on iOS devices it's been quite locked down. So it's been used for things like Apple Pay and some other features, and obviously it came as part of, I think they had a partnership with BMW last year. Was it BMW or someone else? I think it was BMW. For car key unlock. And they're talking now about wider support for things like hotel cards for accessing rooms, for things like car keys, and for just door access, either for your home or for work. So I mean, all of Monash, if you, as staff members, our ID cards let us into buildings. As students, your ID cards let you into labs and other buildings. It's conceivable that in a couple of years we could just be using phones for that, which would be great. I would love it. Certainly, as part of being an academic, I travel a lot to conferences, and I stay at hotels frequently and have to make use of key cards. And I would say they work 70% of the time, and a lot of the time you have to go back and get them recoded because the magnetic strips don't work that well, and they forget the information, or they get decoded by other, I don't know what the term is, but demagnetized or whatever by other cards in your wallet and things like that. So I really like that. I like the idea that our phones, be them Android or iOS devices, I don't care which, would be could hold our digital identity, and you could do away with a lot of physical cards and physical keys. I'd be quite happy to carry my phone as my piece of identification that's with me always. So yeah, I like that idea. Do you have any feelings or thoughts about that, Josh?
I mean, it's a good idea, and I know that's where the technology is going. I'm also a bit of a contrarian there. I prefer old mechanical locks, and and when it comes to cars, I don't mind having digital systems, but I'm very much I still like having a mechanical system because I know that digital systems can fail.
I was going to say, is this a trust thing, given you know how software works?
Yes, it's exactly that.
Yeah, yeah.
But no, I think it's a good idea, particularly the hotel angle. Although I will say, I'm very much not a person that goes around traveling, so I haven't been to many hotels. But just the concept of just being able to use your phone for that stuff, and the ID card for work as well,
would be great. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Amesh, did you ask the question or gave the answer? Sorry, is there anything else you wanted to add to that, or your thoughts on the keys or the Find My network? You can just throw a no in the chat if you don't. Okay, so, and the Find My network is an interesting thing. I mean, it's again something else Apple's been working on for a while. They're what are their tags called? That's like AirTags, which are like there was a company that were doing the exact same thing before, whose name escapes me, but may come to me soon. Yeah, Tile. Thanks. Yes. So this basic idea that you just have small, low-cost tags that you attach to things, and it allows you to locate them, like keys, for example, which we won't need when we've used our phone for unlocking and starting our cars. But hey, yeah, the Find My network's an interesting thing because, I mean, we talked about it in one of the workshops for those of you that listened to that workshop, because someone asked a question, might have even been you, Amesh, about the Find My network and how it works and that kind of thing. It leverages Bluetooth connections, and it leverages round tripping of Bluetooth signals to identify how close things are, which is some of the same technology that Apple have been using for having like watches unlock your laptop if they're within a certain proximity. But the other exciting part about it is it doesn't require network connections to things. So it's a mesh network, and it's a mesh network made up of devices. So you could just have, once you have a saturation of iOS and watches and laptops, Apple devices, full stop, they can form this kind of mesh network, and you can, if devices within it know their location because they're nearby another device that knows its location, or they have an internet connection themselves, then they can be used as part of this method of finding things. And it's clever and exciting, and once again, it's something Apple have worked hard to make the security work very well. I think most of their announcements this year have been about support for different additional devices like AirPods. So like I use AirPods and feel like they're one of the most amazing inventions ever. Probably appreciate my AirPods more than my phone itself, because I remember having physical headphones and tangling them and untangling them constantly. And the fact that AirPods you just carry, in a change pocket of a pair of jeans or something, and just have with you all the time. You take them out and they just work, probably 90%, 99% of the time, 95% of the time, perhaps, are great. But some of the things they announced for Find My Network was supporting finding AirPods. Also, something related, they announced that you can get separation notifications from your AirPods if you happen to have charged them and left them on your desk. I think recently I've been walking a lot during lockdowns, but I'm always disappointed if I've ever walked out of the door, started my walk, and then gone to listen to a podcast or something and found that I don't have my AirPods with me. So I think that will certainly be a thankful change from my perspective. Yeah, do you have any thoughts on the Find My Network, Josh? Or has he disappeared?
Apologies, just had to go check up on the dog.
That's
No,
fine.
I don't actually. So it's not one of the ones that I haven't looked too much into.
Yeah. I mean, look, the basic idea is that now the Find My app, which would be used for locating devices, which was initially just sort of iOS devices that stored their location, but you can also do this for family members' devices, and now it will extend to the AirTags and things like AirPods, but also as part of the AirTag change, which is only from an iOS update a couple of months ago, you can also get direction information and proximity distance information from the thing you're looking for. So it's not even like it says, oh, you're within 100 meters of the thing. You actually get more accurate directions to find it, like where in the house it is, which is actually very, very useful. So it's exciting what they're doing with it. Yeah, okay. If anyone else has had particular announcements or things they're excited about, either just turn on your mic and yell out or throw them in the chat and we can cover them. What should we talk about next, Josh?
I'm trying to think.
You have anything you want to cover?
No,
I could
most
tell
of
you
what
what
I was. Sorry, you go.
I was going to say, I could tell you what other thing I was excited about in a really weird way, which was
Go for it.
someone else in the unit at some point asked if they could use a different IDE instead of Xcode, and that was because they really wanted Vim key bindings. And if you've learned to use Vim as a text editor, then you do kind of feel slower using lots of other things because you're so trained yourself, let's say, to move quickly around files and to jump to places and quickly make modifications, select and change text, all this sort of stuff. And one of the things that Xcode has never really supported it, there's been extensions, and one of the things that is new this year is Vim key bindings in Xcode. So I'm excited by that, even though it's a really geeky thing, because I do, when I'm editing text for programming, a lot of the time I still use Vim. So when I'm not working on iOS.
No, I was going to say that'll be a useful one for cross-platform developers as well. Not for me because I don't use Vim, but
yeah, I thought one of the other things they announced was package manager collections. So at first I was like, why would I want this? And it seems like it's just a way of collecting a bunch of different packages through Swift Package Manager. So obviously we used Swift Package Manager in the unit for the first time this semester. It really only got to a point where it was mature and also supported by Firebase. So that's been a positive change on the whole. We had a lot less students with problems, other than a few of you, some of whom may even be on this call, that had issues with the M1 Max, which hopefully will go away because they were mostly Firebase related, and that will come from Firebase having better support, I think, for M1 Max. But this Swift package collection is somewhat nice because it's the kind of thing that we, as instructors in a sort of IT unit or computer science course, could kind of have a curated list of packages that we either recommended or supported, and then it would be a case of us sort of making that available to you. You'd load that into Xcode, and then you could sort of just pick and choose the things you wanted to use off it. So it may actually be something that we go on to use. I'm not sure.
I think it'll be useful for maybe not for the final assignment, but definitely for the lab tasks.
Yeah. Okay, so Josh, you said one of the things you're excited about was the iPads being able to be a programming environment. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and
what the reason why, or just
yeah, or
what
both? Yeah, exactly. Like what you'd like it for, and then like yeah, the sort of what we've been able to do in the past versus what we can do now.
Yeah, sure. So I was going to say, very simple reason why I want it. My MacBook is getting on in age and starting to actually show its age, and I don't want to buy a new MacBook because I've got a Windows laptop for the game stuff. But basically, the updated changes that they've mentioned is that you can start doing iOS programming, specifically Swift UI, within Swift Playgrounds for the iPad as of coming up in iOS 15. So whilst it's not UIKit, so there are still some limitations. The fact that Swift UI just continues to get annual updates that just make it more and more like feature complete. Really, we're probably at the point or approaching the point where would be easily feasible to develop a full app on an iPad using Swift Playgrounds. Although that would again be in Swift UI, not in UIKit.
Yeah.
Which is half of the way there of where I would ideally want it to be.
Yeah, and I think it's positive. I've used Swift UI. I've got a 9-year-old daughter. She has gone through some of the exercise in Swift Playgrounds, and I thought that was kind of a quite fun way of working through basic programming activities. And then when they added support, I think it was last year, to be able to do some basic Swift UI stuff in there as well. And you could see that they were really pushing Swift Playgrounds as a potential development environment, especially for high school students and things like that. Sort of something that wasn't quite as heavy as Xcode. And interestingly, I met with someone from Apple Education a couple of weeks ago, and her first question was, "Oh, like, what are you using to develop for iOS apps?" And I was like, "That's a weird question," because I was like, "Is there any alternative to Xcode?" But of course, like, she had worked a lot with high schools, and a lot of them were just using iPads and Swift Playgrounds as their programming environment. So it makes sense. I mean, I think that maybe we have sort of two different approaches, the sort of iPad-based one and the Mac, that are sort of coming together and eventually being unified. And in some ways, the Swift UI, the Swift Playgrounds and Swift UI has come from this idea of having side-by-side live views where you get some code and you get a visual representation of it as the working user interface of the app. And this is something that is actually a really useful thing, I think, when you're writing code, to be able to modify both representations. And when we talked about Swift UI in the final version of the unit, in Swift UI, you can do some things like you can select the code and right-click on it, and it'll show you different options you have to modify. And you can do the same thing with the graphical interface. So if you've got a list or a title or something, you can right-click on it in the live representation and change the font or apply a style or add padding or do whatever. So you have these dual representations that are linked. And that was sort of the Swift Playgrounds realm, and with Swift UI, it's come into Xcode, and then these live views have gone back into the Swift Playground. So it's nice. The stuff with being able to produce apps, you can actually create entire iPad apps, as Josh said. You can run them live screen. live screen, full screen. You can run them full screen so they feel like normal apps. And you can even publish them to the App Store through Swift Playgrounds, or at least you will be able to in version 4, this version that will be released in maybe a month or so. So I think it's really enabling for people that are learning now and learning Swift UI as their sort of starting point for learning how to program. So one of the obvious questions is, are we going to move this unit a lot more to Swift UI? Quite possibly. I think that's some of the work that we'll be doing this year and potentially next is looking at which parts and whether we do a wholesale move. Like we've done this before. Josh and I converted the unit from Objective-C to Swift a few years ago now. Was it 3 years ago?
That was Jason that did that.
Was it Jason? Oh yeah, Jason did it. Okay.
It was before our time. But,
so when we did 3029, which was the unit that preceded this,
it was still Swift 3 at that point.
Was it? Okay.
Yes, 2 years prior. 2 years prior to that, it was Objective-C. Jason and Matt Carey's did the conversion, and then we did the updates, and we've been updating it since across the different Swift versions.
Oh, there you go. Thank you very much, because I've totally forgotten all of that then. But yeah, a change like that is a big change to go through and update everything. So we will.
There is always the insane option.
Yeah.
Side by side.
Yeah, Flutter is an interesting thing, and we didn't talk about it. So Amesh just brought up in the chat, Flutter did this for both iOS and Android 2 to 3 years ago with dependency injection, and now it supports macOS, web, Linux. Flutter is interesting and kind of exciting because, as far as I know, what they end up producing is really a native version for native versions of code for each of those operating systems. And then, as you say, Amesh, there's live previews and things like that. And it's pretty impressive what they've been able to produce. Now, I don't have any firsthand experience with it. I've not used it. Josh, you haven't either. But
no, I tend to focus on the native elements.
Yeah. And Amesh, you had used it, right? Because you produced another app previously that made use of it. Is that right? Yeah. So, I mean, what are you willing to talk for a minute or two about what your experience with it was like, and what was what you liked or disliked about it?
Yes. So, in terms of Flutter, it allows you to do everything you do in Swift. It's just the matter of you for every single thing, except for UI based. You can write a Dart wrapper for Android and both iOS, and what it does is in the compilation, it just takes the iOS part and put it in the iOS module, and the Android part in the Android module. So it's just, you can just click on the iOS build folder and open it on Xcode, and Android build folder on Android Studio. So it's just the same thing which you do in Xcode, but you can just write one single code base and get both iOS and Android. And now it supports Windows, Linux, Mac OS, everything.
Just a pretty impressive undertaking. And I think, yeah, the appeal of that is that, as you say, you end up with an Xcode or an Android Studio project, and that's native code. I mean, it's not like a lot of these previous
no boilerplate code or anything.
Yeah, exactly. These previous frameworks or libraries that basically had their own wrappers around a lot of the native components, and then styled them all to look the same across all platforms. So this is going to look like a native app. It is a native app. You're not going to get any of the.
Yeah, and the best thing about it is, if you write using the Cupertino theme, you can get the iOS theme for Android phones as well.
I like that you say that's the best thing is you just want Android to look like iOS.
Yeah, you can get
Michael. Do you hear that sound?
And everything.
Yeah, what's that, Josh?
It's the sound of Apple lawyers furiously typing up a response.
It could be. It makes me laugh, Amesh, because I mean, I've seen people that have
We
fully
often
kind of
see the
styled,
reverse.
yeah, styled their phones. I mean, and Android, sorry, and Google do it with their own apps. Like Google's own iOS apps look very Androidy, right? Their material
Yeah.
design, and they're like, no, we're not following Apple's design guidelines. We're using Android's ones.
And
And
the
that's such
other thing is, Flutter was developed by Google.
Yeah, that's why I was saying like Apple's lawyers furiously typing.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know about this Cupertino theme you mentioned, whether it's a community effort or it's something that Google
No, it's
people
built
actually
into
did.
the Flutter SDK.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Interesting. I'd love to know the history or the origin of that. That'd be quite interesting.
Because Flutter SDK has these two themes, material theme and Cupertino theme. And
Yeah.
Now Flutter SDK is shipped with the Cupertino icons as well.
Interesting. So I wonder what that means. If you can apply these themes to your code on either platforms, I wonder what it's doing in terms of the underlying native components, whether it's just styling them all to look like.
Yeah, they are just styling it. Yeah.
Interesting.
Like if you want to get those, what do you call, the action sheets or whatever it is, everything is built into the Flutter SDK.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it now and it's pretty much, it looks like a native app.
Looks photo perfect. I mean, this has got nothing to do with what we're talking about, but
No.
I should mention it now. There's a young guy, I think he's like 15, who is has meticulously in Swift UI, so I guess it's kind of related to our discussion, has recreated iOS 3 or something like this. Give me 2 seconds. I'll find a link and put it in the chat.
Okay, but why though?
Because I think as a challenge to himself to for Swift UI, it's pretty impressive. So it's a working. It's a current iOS app. You can join the beta for it, and give me 2 seconds. Let me see if I can find the project page. Here we go. So here's the project page. It's called Old OS, and you can join the beta and install it on a current iOS device just by joining the test flight beta. Here, I'll find you the link to join test flight, and you can interact with it. I don't know if any of you used iOS pre iOS 7, but I had an iPhone 2 or whatever, and I have a bunch of nostalgia for how iOS used to look like. Oops, did I put that there twice? Oh, you found the link. You did it. Okay, thanks. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, but this is all written in Swift UI, and it's pretty impressive. It's like a pixel perfect recreation of most of iOS version 2 or something. And he hasn't done every single app, but he's done about maybe 70% of it. And yeah, it's really impressive. So I'll leave you to think about that or to have a look at it. But yeah, it's an open source project, so you could download the whole thing and see kind of what is possible with Swift UI. Yeah. Okay, so what else should we talk about next? In terms of developer technologies, the other big one that was announced was, well, okay, I guess like as part of their announcements for iOS 15, they talked a lot about FaceTime support and doing things like spatial audio, which is having different people speaking in this view. Josh is on the left side of my list of people. He'd come more from the left headphone, something like that. Voice isolation, which is basically like background noise filtering, I think. And then FaceTime links and events. This seems like Apple themselves, I think, are not even using FaceTime internally. I think they might use WebEx or something else. And this is supporting being able to have calendar invites and create a FaceTime link and create events and join them from the browser. So they're adding browser support to FaceTime. So you'll be able to, even if you're not on an iOS device, you'll be able to join FaceTime calls through your browser. So I think that's all moving towards FaceTime being a bit more usable in a commercial setting, but just more usable in the way that people are actually working nowadays, because it was only too specific to the iOS environment or community, let's say.
Yeah.
But then one of the other things sorry, Josh.
I was going to say, but also when FaceTime came out, they had no idea where this was going.
No, that's true. Though, interestingly, if you go back and look, when FaceTime was first made available, Steve Jobs was still alive back then. And in one of his keynotes, he said, we're going to open source the FaceTime code, and we'll make it available, and other people will be able to build apps for other platforms that use FaceTime, and it'll all be encrypted and nice and everything else. And then that was just something that they never ended up doing. And I don't know if it's to do with patents or other issues, or whether they just changed their ideas or directions. And Apple have done this a few times. In fact, there's one announcement that they've already retracted and gone back on since WWDC, which we could talk about in a moment. So that's kind of interesting. But what I was going to say was, for FaceTime, one of the things they announced was SharePlay. This idea that as part of a FaceTime call, they wanted to make it feel like you're actually experiencing something with the other people on the calls. And their example of this was watching a movie together while still being able to chat. But as part of their State of the Union, I think it was, or one of their other videos, they also showed some other demo applications. And this is a framework for developers called SharePlay. I think it's Group Activities is the framework. And it's basically the idea that as part of a FaceTime call, you create a group activity session with the people on that call, and you can share state with them. And that state could be strokes in a drawing app, so that we have a shared whiteboard, which is a demo they showed. It could be sync position and playback state for a movie, so you're all watching a movie at the same position and everyone can pause or fast forward or rewind or whatever. Or it could be any other app, right? So, I mean, I think that's interesting. I've worked a little bit in this space because I've worked with research applications where we wanted to have shared state, and it is the same kind of thing. Like, we're working on a project with Woodside and people there are in Perth, and we want to discuss solutions to a plant layout problem, and they're on Zoom and they're pointing to a pipe and saying, look at that pipe third from the left. It's much better if they can click on it too, and it highlights and we can see what they're looking at. And if they change the view, we see it too. So we've done something similar before. And I think it can be really improve the usability of discussions that you have or collaborations that you have during remote communication with people. So I'm actually really excited about this. I haven't looked at the frameworks, though I understand basically what they'd be doing. And Apple have said that all of the information that's shared, this state, is all encrypted and only available to the people in the call. So typical Apple, they're very privacy and security concerned, which I think is always wonderful. So I'm pretty excited about that. I'll probably have a look at it at some point. Josh, did you have any thoughts on this, or anyone else on the call want to chime in about any of it?
So I was going to say, in terms of the unit itself, not really. We might have a couple students delve into it, but just in terms of what that opens up, and I'm thinking more from my games side of things as well, that's actually really interesting, because just another way to handle social multiplayer games without having to deal with like Discord on one screen, game on the other, trying to organize everyone. If you can just do it through a single framework, then that's fantastic.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's an interesting aspect to it, would be gaming. I think there's one drawback that I see that's also a potential benefit, and that's that it seems very much tied to FaceTime at the moment. So you need to kind of initiate a FaceTime call, then you go into another app and it says, oh, I see you're in a FaceTime call. Do you want to share your state in this app with other people? And in that case, all of them get pulled into that app and they all join and share the state. And I think that's a downside in the sense that it has to be initiated through FaceTime. And maybe the flip side, the benefit of that is that, well, you want it to be via FaceTime because you want to have a communication channel, like Josh just said, which could be Discord or it could be some other mechanism that you're using, a voice channel of some kind. And the fact that it's FaceTime means that you have that already. And the other positive is that it becomes the mechanism for setting this up, which is non-trivial to do. Like if you were going to create your own voice channel and then you have to create your own UI to invite someone and then, you know, get them in there and handle the security. And I guess FaceTime does all that for you. So yeah, I think that's interesting. Okay, cool. Yeah, if any of your audience members want to ask any questions or offer any comments on any of this, please feel free to do so. I think the next thing that might be worth talking about is, well, while we're talking about games, why don't we talk about the reality kit stuff for a minute? There isn't a lot to announce, but Apple were kind of iterating, have been iterating on technologies for graphics. So they've done all of their Metal, which is their low-level graphics frameworks. And as they've been releasing their own chips, they've been making sure that a lot of their graphics are very, very efficient and make use of their custom hardware. So I think we're seeing a lot of benefits of that. And they talked about that. Some of that's mostly outside of my sphere of interest or expertise. I don't know if Josh has more ideas on that, but I mean, they talked about a whole lot of kind of shader debugging tools and timelines and being able to understand a lot of that. They also talked about game controller support, which I thought was interesting. So they've announced support for a bunch of different game controllers for all of their platforms, because I think some of this had come to Mac recently, but I'm not sure it was on the iOS devices. And they also have a built-in on-screen virtual game controller. So I think all of those are probably positive moves that, you know, make some of porting some of these games to their platforms a little bit easier.
I think it's also partly because of the uptick in streaming services that are actually available on iOS as well for games.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
Because from memory, I think Steam, you can now stream using iOS. I think from memory, Xbox is trialing it at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is about the sort of, is this about the sort of streamer game community of people who are like YouTubers and stuff like this?
So
or
not
Twitch?
Not that kind of streaming, as in like streaming the games to play them on the devices. So like Project xCloud is Microsoft's one where you can actually, you don't need to own a console. You just need a device to basically communicate with their servers, and the game runs on their servers and you play it through the iPad.
Got it. So
that is starting to become more common on the gaming side of things, and supporting multiple controllers. One, the porting angle is one as well, because if you're using an engine, Unreal or Unity, that's automated for you. But also, too, I think this streaming angle is starting to come into play as well.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so that comes with the caveat I'm not really a gamer, or I am, but I'm a board gamer, not a not a computer gamer. I thought the other interesting thing was they're obviously pushing kind of AR, VR stuff. So they've done a bunch more work on reality kits, and I think they've announced Reality Kit 2 is the technology for this year, which means kind of major updates to all of that. So this is the main really interesting thing I thought that they announced was something called Object Capture, which is not an app, but an API that uses photogrammetry, which is basically hands up if you've got an iOS device and you've used Face Unlock on it, or whatever it's called. Is it called Face Unlock?
Yes, yeah. I think so.
So, me. Yeah, okay. So, when you first set up Face ID or Face Unlock, Face ID, yeah. What you do is it asks you to kind of look around, right? And it provides you with a sort of wheel and some bars, and as you look up to the left a couple of times, it fills them in, and then it says, okay, you need to look in the other direction. And what it's doing there is it's taking still images of your face and building a 3D model of your face, and then it's using that to recognize and unlock. And this is the same kind of thing that's happening with this object capture photogrammetry, is that one of the problems with AR and VR is creation of 3D models, right? Because you've got a virtual or an augmented reality environment. So we saw this cube that in our demo in the unit where I just had a cube that was hovering above my desk or next to the lectern in the lecture theatre. And that's a very simple 3D object, but what people actually use things like AR for is getting a piece of furniture and seeing what it would look like in their house, or something like that. And you have to create those objects. And there have been cameras, 3D scanners, that are quite expensive and don't work that well. Have you used these, Josh?
No, this was more up Peter's alley, but we have certainly had people do photogrammetry, not with those expensive cameras, but actually with just standard DSLRs. So there is software that you can actually do with that sort of stuff.
Sure. So I mean, I'd used the physical hardware cameras and they did not work that well. And what Josh is talking about with DSLRs and software is exactly what Apple are doing here. They're using the phone, but also presumably the LiDAR technology that's built into modern iPhones, where you can, although having said that, now I'm wondering, the LiDAR is only on the front-facing camera, isn't it? Don't know. Anyway,
I'm not sure.
They might be using the LiDAR part or not, which is basically bouncing infrared signals off things to determine depth of objects in the photograph. And they use this, I think they use it already for stuff like portrait mode on the phone for figuring out foreground versus background.
Yeah.
But the idea is that, you use a bunch of still photos to construct a 3D model. And it's an API, there's an interface for it, but it's designed in such a way that you could build it into many different apps that are 3D object related creation tools or things like that. And it looks like it does a fairly good job of this. I mean, it's interesting because it's something that should make it sort of democratize the technology and make it so that, ordinary everyday people could create 3D models of things, which is not something that had been easily accessible before. So, I mean, one of the things we talked about in the unit with ARKit was that there are actually 3D models available online at some stores, and Apple was pushing, I don't know what they called them, but they were like little packaged objects for the web that you could embed in a web page for, I don't know, a hat or something, or a pair of glasses, and then you could, put them into an augmented reality scene and look at them at the actual size they would be and understand them. And there really wasn't a great uptake on that, even though the technology in ARKit has existed a couple of years now. And I think one of the reasons is the difficulty with creating 3D models. So I suspect that something like this may have a bit of impact in terms of popularizing ARKit or these 3D models. Yeah, do you have any anything to add or any thoughts on that, Josh?
Yeah, look, it's interesting that they're starting to do more with it, because you're right, making it much easier for everyone to actually do modeling, but also, again, coming from the games angle, modeling, the detail that goes into games these days, you can model it by hand, but it's time consuming and extremely expensive. So for games that tend to be more on the realistic side of things, photogrammetry is the next step of where a lot of it is actually going, because it is far easier to get a photogrammetry of like existing models, existing objects in real life, scan them into 3D and then just make tweaks to them as needed instead of having to do the entire thing from scratch.
It's a much easier starting point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know that I think from memory, like a lot of AAA studios, so Call of Duty has a lot of photogrammetry models now. So it is actually starting to become more common.
Yep. Yeah, it makes sense.
It's semester 2. I'm in a very game-focused mindset in semester 2.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, I mean, Josh is involved in lots of games-related teaching for the units, for the university or for the faculty. So, yeah, it's kind of where some of his interest lies. And the other thing, is sort of where there's smoke, there's fire. I mean, one of the things I find myself doing with Apple is maybe thinking about or trying to predict where they're going next. And often if you look at what they're pushing in terms of changes to their APIs or things they're working on, sometimes it's an indication of their next steps. And I think we've seen this a few times historically. And one of the things that's been rumored for a while is that Apple will do some kind of VR or AR hardware. We had Google Glass, and we've had various people in the tech business who've either dipped their toes or jumped right into VR technology. And most recently, I think Facebook now has their offering with the Quest. And I think there's a high likelihood, I mean, it's been rumored for a while, that we'll get Apple official AR or VR glasses or headsets at some point. So they seem to be doing a lot of supporting work towards this, let's say. So I also find that an interesting thing to look at and just be sort of wary of, or keep an awareness of. What else do we have to discuss for developer things? They announced some very low, or just sort of small things. One of them was various widget improvements. I think widgets have been a growing thing over the last couple of years. I think their headline feature was bigger widgets for the iPad this year, which is, not super exciting, but if you're a developer and you've created widgets, then supporting bigger ones or having the opportunity to fit more into them is cool. A couple of things they announced there was they said some discoverability parts of it. They talked about having intents related to widgets, which I thought was really interesting. They talked about having special offers and being able to surface widgets and smartly display them in a kind of widget carousel, which straight away to me goes, I sort of groan because I think of using them as an advertising mechanism, right? So I hope that, and people will, when there's opportunities to do that. We've seen it with things like push notifications, right? It's never the intent, but even Apple themselves have used them for promotional purposes. You might have seen push notifications advertising like Apple TV shows and things like that. So yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if there's sort of more features to support that. The other things that they mentioned that probably don't matter so much for the unit, one was parental controls. Apple have had very good parental features as part of the apps, being able to control, lock down, and monitor devices that kids have. And mostly what they've done this year is made APIs so that it's not just Apple or people who can do this directly through Apple's apps, but you'll be able to create apps that modify parental settings and set restrictions and get logging information to be able to monitor certain things. And there's some interesting things there. Some of them are things like screen time APIs, where you could have devices with shared screen time, and there's let's say opportunities that are opened up by these API changes, but they're not something we've probably talked about or worked with or would work with much in the unit. I don't think that's that exciting. I think one thing we will have to look at is notifications changed a bit with iOS 15. So Apple announced a whole lot of focus related features, they called them. And this is towards Apple doing various things in sort of mindfulness space, but also recognizing that devices get lots and lots and lots of notifications. And they've done some features in recent years like do not disturb. So, you know, for those of you with iPhones or iOS devices, you can sort of set sleep schedules on them and have them so they don't get notifications and don't get woken up. You won't get phone calls in the night unless it's someone who's on your favorites list or they call multiple times. And yeah, as part of this, the things they announced for developers were interruption levels for notifications. So in the past, where we've just created a notification, now we'd have to set levels associated with it. So there's passive notifications, which are sort of like, you know, don't care, look at them whenever you get a chance, but otherwise unimportant. Active notifications, which are kind of the next level importance, like let's say maybe like, I don't know, a calendar notification for something that's upcoming, let's say. Then what they call time sensitive notifications, which are classed as important, and they'll be announced by Siri if you're wearing AirPods. And then what they call critical alerts, which will occur even if the device is muted, and then apps need to have a special entitlement to be able to use them. So there's a sort of added level of security there. So, I mean, I mention these not because I think they're terribly interesting. I think they're a good thing. I certainly consume notifications at different levels, even though there's only one type of notifications currently. There's ones that I pay different amounts of importance to, and I presume the rest of you with iOS devices also probably do that. So I think the maybe more interesting part is that this part seems less developer focused, but they said that they're going to be using machine learning, as they are for lots of aspects of iOS, to look at the way that you respond to notifications and either adaptively change priorities of things and how they're displayed based on your behavior, or allow you to set that yourself and override it. So that's quite interesting, because then they also have the like a digest. It's a bit like if you've ever subscribed to really chatty mailing lists, they often give you the option of receiving each message in the mailing list individually or a daily digest. And this seems a lot like the sort of daily digest idea that, you know, if you have a focused time when you're at work or something, then at 5 p.m. when you finish, you might end up with a summary of a bunch of notifications for things that are not in your interest during your day. There's something that excites you, Josh, or you want to add to in any way, or couldn't really care about?
Nothing that really stood out to me like as massively exciting. I don't know. I'm very boring with my phone. I use it for emails and for playing Pokemon Go.
Pokemon Go? Was it nothing announced for Pokemon Go, eh?
No, it's just that, like, in terms of features, because I often bounce between Android and iOS, so I've had a lot of Android phones in the past. I've got an iOS phone at the moment. Yeah, there's no features that have been announced that really just kind of go, that's really cool. It's just a case of, I might use them, maybe.
Yeah.
Like, they're not even the notification stuff where it's just like, when I see notifications, I just dismiss them immediately.
Sure. Well, now you maybe won't even need to. It'll just know that you dismiss them. Yeah. That's great. I mean, so I'm not a particular Android person. I pay sort of a side attention to it. Did you watch any of the Google I/O announcements this year, Josh? Was there anything
not this year? I've been too busy.
Year? Okay, cool. No worries.
I would like to, but
yeah, I think we mentioned it in the unit at some point, but Google also have their sort of equivalent to WWDC, which is their I/O developer conference, and they do the same kind of thing. They announced features for the next version of Android and various other things they're working on. And I mean, both companies, Apple and Google, have been doing a lot of things in the machine learning space, not surprisingly, but making use of it in clever ways, which is maybe a really nice segue for talking about some of the machine learning stuff that Apple are doing. Like the obvious thing that comes to mind is they talked about a feature, which I can't remember the name of, called live text. I think it's called live text. And the idea was that on iOS devices, or on iOS 15 and iPadOS 15, they will be running machine learning on all of the photos on the device in your photo library and detecting text in them. So where there's text in photos, because it's a document that you scanned or a photo you took that had a sign in it, you'll be able to like tap on the text and copy it as you could any other text, even though it's in a photo instead of inside a text view or something. And that's pretty exciting and cool. So, and that's, I mean, that's a case where machine learning is incredibly good at stuff like that. Like you train it how to recognize text and it'll find text and do a good job of it. And it may not always do a perfect job, but if it mostly works most of the time, that's still amazing. I've many times in the past, I've taken photos of things and then typed out the information that was in them, and to be able to just seamlessly copy that and use it is pretty cool. And they said that that means that it will be part of Spotlight results. So if you want to like search your photos for a name of, I don't know, a band poster that you saw or a restaurant you went to, and you put the name of it and that name was recognized out of the text in the photo, that will be in the search results and that photo will get surfaced by Spotlight. So things like that are kind of pretty magical and amazing when they work and work well. So I was excited by that. I thought that might be quite interesting. What was the other ML thing that they said they were doing? I feel like there was another one. I don't know if I wrote it down. Did you have anything in your notes from it, Josh?
Not for the machine learning side of things, no.
Trying from, I can't remember. Anyway, maybe it'll come to me. But yeah, making use of these kind of things more and more often in clever ways. Yeah, look, we're getting close to the end of this now. So audience people, is there anything else that we didn't cover that you'd like us to? If not, Josh, or any other things you want to talk about that we didn't cover?
None that I can think of, no. Just a case of just keep developing. Just because the unit's over doesn't mean you have to stop.
Yeah. I mean, I think iOS and the associated technologies are exciting. There's always new things each year that can be done with them. And yeah, there's the capabilities of these mobile devices that we have keep growing, and with it the abilities of things we can do as programmers. So I always think that's very exciting.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, just one actual other point as well. I've already said this to all of the students that I had in my meetings, and I'm sure that Michael has mentioned it in the lectures as well. But just for all of you, remember for your final assignments, even if you don't end up releasing it on the App Store, make sure you keep a copy of it and actually take screenshots of within the app, because that on your resume as a piece of work that you've actually completed. Yes, it's a university assignment, but it's still a full app that you've completed on your own. So it is worthwhile having that as evidence of experience that you've got in the area.
Yeah, absolutely. Is it kind of, you're building a portfolio of work that shows that you can, you have the capabilities to build this sort of stuff. So I very much personally think of the unit as a sort of entrepreneurship unit, and a unit where students have the opportunity to build their portfolio and do something real. And we've very much designed the unit to be like that. So no, that's.
I think from memory as well, over the summer, someone is looking for iOS developers.
Yes, that's one of the reasons that I wrote, or one of the reasons I created this LinkedIn group, is because I do quite often get asked for students that could do sort of casual paid work doing app development. And I lose contact with students once the unit has ended. So that's part of the way of having a sort of community of people that might be interested in this. So it's very likely as well that I'll have a summer project also that's looking for a student to do some iOS development. So I'll post about that when it's available as well. And yeah, these opportunities do come up quite frequently. So yeah, if you haven't and you're listening to this call or on this call with us, please see my Moodle announcement that talked about the LinkedIn group and join that, and we'll accept you into it. It hasn't had any comments yet, but I'll post the video from this. And Amesh, you should mention about your app in there, or I'll mention about it, because yeah, we had a couple of students that had released apps recently, and that's exciting. Yeah, the other thing we didn't talk about, which we could probably talk a little bit before we finish off, was Apple also announced something called Xcode Cloud. And I mean, one of the things that's very prevalent in industry right now is this CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment approach to programming. And Xcode Cloud looks like it will be a paid service, but the basic idea behind it is Apple are making available, I guess, computing power in the cloud and tools that are integrated with Xcode so that you can do things like build your app in the cloud, so and build it on a range of different machines, and then run it on real devices that have a range of different hardware and operating systems. And this is something you could set up yourself. Be difficult. We talked in the unit about tests and integration tests and also like UI tests. And this is what you would make use of with Xcode Cloud. But the idea is that you could set this up just with an account on it, and you can trigger it so that it automatically builds your app off every commit to a Git repository, and you get back the results, and you can just see the build errors and open them in a file in your project. It's all very heavily integrated in a sort of very Apple-y way. And but you can also trigger it to run tests after each commit, and it could do them on, all the beta devices, even if you don't have a beta device yet, or it could do them on all of the current hardware that Apple sells with the last 3 operating systems. And personally, I've had iOS apps for 11 years, I think now. And at various points, I've had, a bunch of iOS devices sitting on my desk. I've got probably 3 ones here in close reach that have different versions of iOS on. Yeah, and Josh has got a couple here, and it's not as many as I used to have, because I used to keep the last 3 or 4 versions of things, and but that's a lot of time and effort to manage that. And if Apple are providing it and you can make use of it, and it looks like from their discussion of this in their developer state of the union, you can like run UI tests on all of these devices, and you could run them with different localizations for a couple of different languages and with different orientations of the device, and it will send you back screenshots of each of these UI tests running, and you can check that they match up. So it's quite a useful way of being able to do testing that would otherwise be quite difficult. So I think that's an exciting way of recognizing the way that people work and how Xcode maybe in the past wasn't supporting that particularly well. Some of the other things as well are like Xcode is getting much better integration with version control systems like Git. So they demoed a bunch of stuff where you could see things like source code comments with team members and view pull requests and view the state of them all within Xcode, and do a lot of that work more easily within that. So Xcode has not always, but for a while had integration with Git, but it hasn't been fabulous. It hasn't supported everything. And I think they're working towards that being a lot better. And I think that's something else we will probably change about the unit. We've been discussing a little bit is in this unit, students typically benefit when they start working on their apps early and we can comment on things early and see them regularly. And occasionally we have students who lose their work because they're not backing it up. And really, as a third year unit, I would hope that most students are using version control like Git or something else. But that's not always the case. And I think probably what we'll do on future versions is actually require students to have a Git repository, and we'll assess that as part of the unit. So even though it's not a core thing we're teaching, it'll just be a way of working that is recommended or required. And maybe we'll even make use of commenting on their code through the Git repository as a way of feedback, right? So we could do code review style feedback for the unit. So like Amar's thumbs upping that. And I think the nice thing about that would be recognition that that's the way people work in industry as well, right? So if we can mirror that a bit more, I think that's beneficial because it adds realism to the project from less of being a student project and more like an industry experience. So that was my other thought about those features. While I haven't investigated them, I was excited by them and I thought, yeah, that's great. That's something we can investigate a bit more and probably make use of. Yeah, any last thoughts, Josh?
I did post a link to a summer summer thing that people may want to apply for if they're interested as well.
Ah, fabulous. Thanks, Josh. Anyone else on the call? Anything you want to ask either Josh or I, or mention about WWDC? Are you involved in this project, Josh?
No, it's yours.
Is it? Oh, it's all of them, is it?
Yeah, it's just a list of all of them.
Ah, okay, my one. Where's my one?
About third to halfway down the page.
All right, give me a second. I might be able to, can we link to it? Is there an anchor in the page or something?
Fortunately not. I could probably, well, I could link to the application thing, but yeah.
Hold on one second. Ugh. Anyway, yeah, there's a project. If you search for my name in there, you'll find the project I was talking about, which is basically building an iOS app to support a kind of medical technology thing where we're trying to do early detection of kidney disease using a little portable mass spectrometer and communicating with an iOS device to send those results to the cloud, and also to a machine learning model in the cloud will actually do some kind of diagnosis on it and get a result. And then we're looking to display that in an iOS app. So the iOS app is sort of the vessel for being able to talk to the device and then display some results via Bluetooth.
Sounds like an interesting project.
Yeah, it is an interesting project, and it's working with people in medical faculty. So interestingly, this page doesn't have a lot of other details because there's a link. I did a website with, oh yeah, no, more information about the project. Yeah, so there's a link that says more information about the project and links to a page with a bit more information. Great. Okay, no one's posted anything in the chat. Closing thoughts. Yeah, a bit like Josh said, I'm just always excited and get a bit enthusiastic after WWDC because there's new things to play with, new features of iOS. I guess the thing I mentioned before and didn't discuss that Apple went backwards on, they announced some graphical changes for Safari as part of WWDC. And these are quite high profile because everyone uses browsers. And they said, we're changing the Safari interface and it's amazing. We're going to combine the tab bar and the address bar of the browser so that you'll be able to just click on a tab and it will expand and be the address bar and you can change the address. And yeah, it's brilliant. And like Apple, their marketing spiel when they present this as part of the keynote is always like, this is the best thing ever. And I think lots of people used it. So one, they changed the interface of what the interface for Safari and moving between tabs will be like on iPad and iOS and macOS. And they've already gone back on this, combining the tab groups and the address bar. So in the third beta, I think, they changed it back kind of so that they have a separate address bar. And actually then people complained because it was taking more, like originally the benefit was it took less vertical space, and now I think it takes more than the old version. But I think so I actually didn't like that change much. And there's some weirdness with the beta version of Safari, which you can try even on, what are we on now? High Sierra? Can't remember what the latest version of, no, Big Sur, sorry, Big Sur.
Big Sur, yeah.
Yeah, you can use it even on Big Sur because Safari has a technology preview that includes a sort of beta version of it. So even if you're not running the latest macOS beta, you can still see what this looks like. And so I have used that for a bit. And while I didn't like the combined tab bar, and the other thing I didn't like is, when you double click on a window, it minimizes it. For a while in one of the betas, if you double clicked on a tab, which I don't know why I would do that, but I must have done it at least a few times accidentally, it would minimize the window, which I definitely didn't like. But that seems to have changed back now. But what they did do, which is interesting, is they have this concept of tab groups, which is groups of tabs that are kind of like a workspace. So like maybe you would be working on an assignment and you'd have a set of tabs that are related to that assignment. Might be the assignment instructions, some websites you're referring to. You might have a set of tabs for another unit. You might have a set of tabs that's your finances, or you might have another set of tabs that's based on a hobby or something. And you can very easily open and close these, switch between them, and it remembers the state of these different tab groups. So it's like favorites in some way, but the tab groups remember their state and they're synchronized across devices, so that if you have an iPad or an iPhone and you have that tab group open, it shows the same things on all of them. So I think actually I've been using that a little bit in the beta version of, or the technology preview of Safari. I actually think that's quite a good change, and I think it will fit into at least my personal workflow. So that's another thing I've been excited about. Yeah. Any final thought, Josh? Are we all done?
I think that wraps it up pretty much.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, audience members. And once again, yeah, this is probably my chance to say goodbye to a lot of you, unless I have some other interaction with you through research or through some other teaching at some point. But I'll just say best of luck with any kind of iOS work or career that you do. And please join this LinkedIn group and stay in contact. And I'd love hearing about anything that you do in this field. So if you end up working in the iOS development space or releasing apps of your own, please, yeah, let me know. I'd love to hear about that. So yeah, thanks everyone.
Yep, and I'll see some of you on Friday.
Exactly. Cool. Thanks for joining us. See ya.